claimed neutrality, but had quietly funneled funds into conservative media circles for years. Her fingers lingered on the name of another guest speaker, Representative Jasmine Crockett. A chill of excitement ran down her spine, but before she could reply, her manager, Terrence, a veteran in political PR, stepped into the room with a narrowed gaze and said flatly, "You need to know what you're walking into." Terrence dropped a folder on the table, its contents sliding out like classified evidence. Inside were articles, leaked emails, and testimonies from past speakers, most of them women of color, who had been silenced mid-panel, had microphones accidentally cut off, or were edited out of promotional videos after mentioning systemic racism. "They want your face," he said. "They don't want your voice." Yara's jaw clenched. She'd been here before, offered a spotlight but told which angles to stand in. She looked back down at Jasmine's name. That woman didn't soften her voice for anyone. The question now wasn't whether she could make a difference. It was whether she was willing to risk everything to try. She folded the letter slowly, like it might break if she moved too fast. Her voice was low but certain. "I'm going," she said, "but I'm not going to be quiet." Backstage was colder than she expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The lighting buzzed overhead with sterile indifference, and production staff floated past with clipboards and forced smiles, eyes flicking to Yara like she was furniture to be arranged. The dressing room was a maze of partitioned spaces, sleek but soulless. She followed the signs to the green room, pulse steady, heels clicking with quiet defiance. And then she saw her, Representative Jasmine Crockett, seated alone on a leather bench, reviewing a folder filled with handwritten notes and legal tabs, her brows furrowed in silent determination. No entourage, no makeup artist, just her and the truth she came to carry. Yara hesitated for half a second before walking over. Jasmine looked up, sharp, direct, but not unkind. There was a recognition in her eyes, as if she already knew why Yara was here. "Did they brief you on the rules?" Jasmine asked, not bothering to say hello. Her voice was low, calm, and lined with something heavier than frustration. "They don't like it when we say things that sting." Yara smiled, not out of amusement, but resonance. "They invited my face," she replied, "but warned me not to bring my voice." Jasmine exhaled through her nose, a sound that was half a laugh, half a scar. "You'll fit in just fine then." In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not friendship yet, but an understanding built on shared battles. Jasmine closed her folder and leaned forward, eyes narrowing with clarity. "Last year I testified about racial disparities in sentencing. I used statistics from the DOJ, government sources. My mic cut out 2 minutes in. They called it a technical glitch. CNN never aired it, but a video from someone's phone went viral. That's the only reason anyone knew it happened." She paused, then added, "They don't kill you with bullets in these rooms. They kill you with silence." Yara sat down beside her, no longer unsure. "That's why I'm here," she said quietly. "Not for the panel, for the fight." Jasmine nodded slowly, measuring her. "Then they'll try to push you out before you ever step in." The green room door creaked open, and with it came a flash of camera lights, followed by the tight click of heels and the artificial enthusiasm of a local TV reporter, blonde and polished, already mic'd up. She didn't greet them so much as approach like a shark sensing blood. "Ladies," she said brightly, "before the panel starts, can I ask just one quick question for our pre-show coverage?" Jasmine's expression froze. "Depends on the question," she said, tone flat. The reporter smiled wider, fake and sharp. "Do you think constantly bringing up race helps unify young Americans, or does it just keep reopening old wounds?" The question dropped like acid on silk, a trap dressed as curiosity. Jasmine didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed. Not out of fear, but calculation. It was the kind of question designed to corner a black woman and turn her into a headline, no matter how she answered. But before Jasmine could respond, Yara leaned forward, calm and steady, her voice clear and sharp. "That's a strange question," she said. "Would you ask a veteran if talking about post-traumatic stress disorder is just making things worse? Or do you only expect black women to stay quiet so others can feel more comfortable? The reporter hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. Behind her, the camera crew shifted awkwardly. Jasmine didn't say a word. She just turned slightly, watching. Yara kept going. These wounds were never healed, she said, still composed, because the system keeps hurting us. And if talking about it makes people uncomfortable, maybe the real question is, who's still holding the knife? The room went silent. Not the kind of silence meant to shut someone down, but the kind that said, "We heard you." The reporter quickly muttered a thank you and backed away, her confident steps suddenly unsure. Jasmine looked at Yara with a steady, thoughtful gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't clap. But when she finally spoke, her words said more than either of those things could. "It's been a long time since someone stood up for me like that." Yara nodded, her voice soft but certain. "You don't have to stand alone anymore." The moment they stood together, the ground beneath them began to shift. And in the shadows, someone decided it was time to push back. The email came without a sender, no subject line, just a message sitting in Yara's inbox like a ticking clock. "If you defend her, you'll fall with her." That was it. No greeting, no sign-off, no attachments. Just a threat, sharpened down to its simplest form. Yara stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the delete key but not pressing it. The timing wasn't a coincidence. This came less than an hour after the green room moment, after her words sliced through the air and left a reporter scrambling for cover. Someone had been watching, and they weren't just offended, they were afraid. She didn't forward it. She didn't mention it to her team. She just closed the laptop, stood up, and walked back to Jasmine. Jasmine was pacing when she arrived, her phone held out as if she didn't want to touch it anymore. "We've got a problem," she said flatly, not even waiting for hello. She handed Yara the screen. It was a PDF, internal documents, likely leaked, with the watermark of the Civic Horizon Foundation on every page. A section titled "Speaker Control Measures" was highlighted in red. Beneath it, a bullet list. Limit Crockett to prepared remarks. Cut feed if she references systemic bias, law enforcement disparities, or racial injustice. Avoid camera close-ups during off-script commentary. Yara read it twice, her chest tightening with each word. This wasn't subtle censorship. This was calculated erasure. They hadn't just invited Jasmine to speak. They had scripted her into silence. A door creaked nearby. The moderator's prep room. The original host, a neutral-faced journalist known for her measured tone, was being escorted out. In her place, a man stepped in, Leonard Hayes, former press liaison to two conservative senators, known for smiling while steamrolling over dissent. Yara didn't need to Google him. She remembered his interviews, the kind where activists walked in hopeful and walked out gutted. Jasmine's expression hardened. "They've replaced the moderator," she said. "He's here to control the narrative, not host a dialogue." Yara didn't reply. Her jaw was set, her hands clenched. This wasn't a discussion panel anymore. This was a trap in designer lighting. Security presence around the venue quietly increased. Jasmine noticed it first. 2 new guards posted near the side hallway, now restricted for technical use only. The producer, who had once been warm and chatty, now avoided eye contact. Yara received a gentle reminder that her time on stage had been reduced from 12 minutes to 6. No explanation, just a schedule change. Jasmine's mic was tested 4 times. The final one cut off halfway through. "Another glitch," they said. Everything felt normal until you looked closely. Then it all felt rigged. Back in the dressing room, the air was heavy, like before a storm. Jasmine sat, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. "They think if they box us in, we'll either self-censor or snap on camera," she said, voice low but steady. "Either way, they win." Yara was quiet for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small voice recorder. She placed it on the table. "Then let's give them something they didn't script." Jasmine looked up, eyes locking with hers. "You sure?" she asked. "Because after this, there's no walking it back." Yara didn't blink. "If they're going to cut the mic, we better say something worth cutting." It wasn't about rebellion anymore. It wasn't even about exposure. It was about truth. and the price of carrying it into rooms that weren't built for it. They didn't rehearse. They didn't plan a dramatic stunt. They just sat across from each other, two women in full control of their words, deciding together that silence was no longer an option. Outside the door, assistants were preparing their next moves, sponsors were polishing their optics, and someone, somewhere, was probably crafting another anonymous email. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was what would be said when the lights came on, and more importantly, what would still echo after they tried to shut it down. They didn't say, "Don't speak." They just built a stage where truth wouldn't survive the microphone. The lights dimmed to a soft gold as Jasmine stepped onto the stage, the applause polite, almost programmed. She moved with quiet command, every step a statement, every breath sharpened by the storm she knew was coming. Behind her, the Civic Horizon logo glowed like a seal of approval, but Jasmine knew better. That light wasn't permission, it was surveillance. She approached the podium with the poise of a trial lawyer, papers in hand, but her eyes locked with the crowd, not the script. She wasn't here to play their game. She was here to burn the rule book. "My name is Representative Jasmine Crockett," she began, her voice calm, but weighted like a blade kept under wraps. "And I came here today not just to speak, but to say the things too many rooms like this were built to erase." The first few lines drew polite nods, the kind that lives somewhere between agreement and expectation. But Jasmine wasn't interested in polite. Her tone shifted, slower, deeper, as she continued. "If we're going to talk about justice, we have to start with the truth, that our legal system is not broken. It was built this way. It doesn't fail everyone equally. It targets, it profiles, it punishes selectively. This is systemic discrimination." Then, without warning, her microphone died. No crackle, no fade, just silence. The kind that slices mid-sentence. Her lips moved, but no sound reached the audience. She paused, tapped the podium, glanced at the mic, then looked directly at the tech crew backstage. They avoided her eyes. The moderator, seated stage left, stood quickly, forcing a smile so tight it looked stapled in place. "Looks like we're having some technical issues," he said, voice rising over the speakers Jasmine no longer controlled. "We'll just pause briefly and allow our next speaker to step forward." He turned toward her with a hand gesture wrapped in fake courtesy. "Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for your remarks." Jasmine didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, her silence now louder than any speech. Her eyes scanned the crowd, some confused, some frozen, others quietly understanding exactly what they had just witnessed. This wasn't a glitch. This was a muzzle, and the message couldn't be clearer. The moment you name the truth, we pull the plug. But just as silence began to settle like a verdict, another voice rose, not from the podium, but from the edge of the stage, where defiance had been waiting its turn. Yara didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask. She moved. From her seat near the side aisle, she stepped forward with purpose, slipping past two stunned coordinators who reached for clipboards but said nothing. In one smooth motion, she picked up the handheld mic resting on the moderator's empty chair and stepped into the light. The silence in the room was electric, charged, confused, expectant. She looked out at the crowd, then turned to Jasmine, who still stood behind the dead mic like a statue refusing to kneel. Yara's voice cut through the air, clear and unshakable. "If her mic's off," she said, her eyes locked on the audience, "then I'll be her mic tonight." The words hung for a second, suspended like a match just before it catches fire. Then it happened. A single clap, then another. Then the room erupted. Dozens of students stood first, then the back rows, then the center. The applause grew like a wave, not polite but pounding, not performative but defiant. Some people shouted her name. Others simply raised their fists. The moderator froze, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Jasmine blinked once, then exhaled, her shoulders relaxing just enough to let something ancient and exhausted go. In that moment, the narrative they tried to control shattered. The girl with the safe image had just blown the doors off their script. And the crowd, once meant to witness a polished performance, had now become part of something real. Rebellion in real time. What began as a single sentence on a dying microphone didn't end in that room. It exploded far beyond it, traveling faster than any spotlight they could control. The first clip hit TikTok just 20 minutes after the moment unfolded. A shaky phone camera caught it all. Jasmine's mic dying mid-sentence, the moderator cutting her off, and Yara stepping into the frame like thunder without warning. The audio caught her voice perfectly. "If her mic's off, then I'll be her mic tonight." That line, raw, clean, defiant, landed like a lit match in a dry field. Within hours, it had been reposted across Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, stitched into edits with protest chants and courtroom montages, shared with captions like, "This is what allyship looks like," and "They tried to silence her. We made her louder." Views surged by the hundreds of thousands, then millions. By sunrise, "Let Her Speak" was trending globally. Not just a hashtag, a rallying cry. It appeared on signs in college campuses and on the backs of denim jackets. Artists reposted the clip in black and white with orchestral music swelling beneath it. Journalists rewrote their headlines overnight. Yara's line became a ringtone. Jasmine's frozen expression, caught between fury and restraint, was turned into digital art, a face staring back at the world with a look that asked, "Now that you see it, what will you do?" The internet didn't just react, it rose. And for one perfect moment, truth moved faster than suppression, but the backlash came just as fast. Within 12 hours, conservative pundits flooded morning news shows with new talking points. They labeled it a stage stunt, claimed Jasmine had orchestrated a victim narrative, and accused Yara of performative politics. One network played the clip 15 times in 1 hour, each time cutting off the part where Jasmine mentioned systemic injustice. The focus shifted. They dissected her tone, her posture, her earrings. "Is this professionalism?" one anchor asked. "Or manufactured outrage?" Think pieces flooded the media, some calling them heroes, others branding them agitators. Comment sections burned. Anonymous accounts began posting false claims that Jasmine had cursed at producers backstage, that Yara had refused to sign a media agreement. None of it was true, but the machine didn't care about truth. It only cared about volume. Behind the scenes, speaking invitations were pulled. Event sponsors paused endorsements. At least 2 universities canceled upcoming forums where Jasmine was set to appear, citing security concerns. Yara sat on the edge of her hotel bed, phone buzzing nonstop. Her inbox was split in 2. Half thank yous, half warnings. "This is the price," she whispered to herself. On the other side of the city, Jasmine looked out the window of a silent car. "They don't fear our voices," she muttered. "They fear what happens when we give each other one." The system had struck back, but something had already shifted. Something it couldn't unmake. The moment had left the room. It now lived in millions of hands, reshared, reframed, and repeated. And every time someone pressed play, that microphone turned back on. But the louder their truth echoed, the more desperate the system became to drown it. Not with facts, but with fiction designed to destroy them. It started like a real video. Jasmine standing at a podium, her hands raised for emphasis, her voice firm. But something was off. The cadence was too sharp, the words slightly mismatched with her lips. Within seconds, it was clear. This wasn't footage from the summit. This was a deep fake. A digitally altered clip with Jasmine's image stitched onto manipulated audio. In it, she appeared to shout calls for resistance in the streets, for tearing down institutions, and burning the foundation of white law. Every line was false, crafted, edited, weaponized. But it spread like wildfire. Pushed by shadow accounts and retweeted by verified ones, the video was shared over 3 million times in 24 hours. The damage didn't wait for fact-checkers. Within hours, NBC pulled Yara's scheduled interview. No phone call, no explanation. Just a quiet cancellation email from a junior producer with a cold subject line. Segment cut, programming shift. It had taken weeks to coordinate that interview. A chance to speak directly, to reclaim the narrative. Now it was gone, replaced by reruns and talking heads dissecting a video that wasn't even real. Yara stared at the screen in disbelief. She called, texted, emailed. No one responded. Doors that had been wide open just days ago now slammed shut without sound. By noon, the collapse accelerated. A major cosmetics brand pulled its campaign with Yara, citing brand neutrality. A nonprofit Jasmine partnered with for criminal justice reform released a vague statement about needing to review affiliations. One by one, corporate sponsors vanished into silence, taking money, support, and visibility with them. Behind closed doors, contracts were quietly terminated. Their names were scrubbed from upcoming speaker lists. A publishing deal Jasmine had been negotiating for months was suddenly paused indefinitely. There were no scandals, no crimes, no public outbursts, only the illusion of danger, and that was enough. Jasmine stood by the window of her hotel suite. The city stretched out beneath her like a battlefield in waiting. Her phone was still lit with push notifications. Headlines, false reports, withdrawal notices. She didn't look at them anymore. "They think they're hurting me," she said, her voice low, sharp, "but they're not silencing me. They're just exposing how fragile their system really is." Her hands were clenched, not in fear, but in clarity, the kind that comes after enough blows to know where the next one will land. If a microphone threatens your democracy, then your democracy was never real. Yara sat on the couch behind her eyes bloodshot from sleepless hours, her laptop open, messages pouring in faster than she could read. She looked up, her voice calm but certain. "This isn't a speaking engagement anymore," she said. "This is a front line." The air between them was thick, not with panic, but with resolve. Jasmine turned from the window, eyes locked on Yara's. "They started this thinking they could erase one voice," she said, "but now they've got millions watching. Every time they try to shut me down, someone else picks up the mic." Yara nodded, slowly closing her laptop. "Then we don't wait for a platform. We build one they can't touch." It wasn't bravado. It was survival turned into strategy. Jasmine took a breath like someone preparing to walk back into fire. "Let them keep trying," she said, "because I'm not the one being burned. They are, by their own fear." And with that, they rose, not as victims, but as architects of a resistance that could no longer be contained. They had been pushed off the stage, smeared on screen, and erased from the schedule. But what came next would prove who was really afraid of the truth. It happened just after midnight, when most of the venue had gone quiet and the last of the media crews had packed up their lights. A backstage assistant, young, nervous, eyes darting like he knew he was breaking every rule in the handbook, found Yara and Jasmine in the service corridor behind the main auditorium. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I saw something," he said. "I wasn't supposed to, but if they're silencing you, you should see it too." They followed him past locked doors and storage crates labeled Civic Horizon AV property, past rows of silent screens and sound equipment, still humming in standby mode. At the end of the hallway, he keyed in a code to a restricted meeting room. No name on the door, just a keypad and a lock too advanced for anyone not meant to be there. The room was stark, all chrome edges and frosted glass. The kind of place where bad decisions wore suits and called themselves strategy. On the center table sat a thick binder marked "Confidential, Internal Use Only." Next to it, a laptop screen glowed with an open slideshow. "Panel Management Protocol, Risk Mitigation for High-Impact Speakers." Jasmine stepped forward first. She opened the binder, flipped to the tabs already flagged in red. Her eyes didn't blink once. Yara leaned in beside her, reading line by line. There it was, in bullet points, in bold text, in the language of control disguised as caution. "Monitor Crockett's remarks for deviation from pre-approved script. Audio cutoff enabled at discretion of floor producer. Flag keywords: systemic, racist, inequality, state violence. In event of off-script commentary, transition moderator to redirect audience attention." It was all there, word for word. Not conspiracy, not paranoia. Proof. Yara's breath caught in her throat, fury and disbelief colliding behind her ribs. She pulled out her phone and began snapping photos. The binder, the laptop screen, the timestamp. Flash off, fast hands, controlled rage. Jasmine was silent, but her hands were fists. "They didn't just expect me to be quiet," she said through clenched teeth. They designed an entire system to make sure I stayed that way. The assistant shifted uncomfortably, his eyes never meeting theirs. They told us this was standard protocol, he mumbled. I thought it was just in case someone went off topic. Yara looked at him, her voice calm but carved from steel. Truth isn't off topic, it's the whole damn point. Back at their hotel, the two women laid out the evidence on the bed like a war table. The photos, the documents, the audio from the panel that never aired. Every piece a weapon. Yara drafted the email herself, addressed to one name, Lena Torres, an investigative journalist known for cracking political cover-ups and burning bridges with corporate sponsors like they were dry leaves. Torres had covered police corruption, election fraud, and deep state surveillance. If anyone could handle this, it was her. Yara attached the files, double encrypted, and wrote just one line in the body of the email. They tried to silence the wrong women. As she hit send, the room felt heavier. Not with fear, but with certainty. Jasmine paced near the window, phone in hand, the city lights flickering below. When this goes public, she said, they'll say we made it all up. Yara nodded. They'll scream fake news, overreaction, political theater. Jasmine turned, her eyes blazing now. Let them, because this time, we're not just telling the truth. We're showing their fingerprints on the muzzle. Moments later, Torres replied. Just one line. Meet me at 8, and bring everything. They had the evidence. They had the will. And now, for the first time since the summit began, they had a chance to speak. Not from a podium, not through a script, but on their own terms. The machine had tried to erase them, but in the process it left a trail, and Jasmine and Yara were ready to turn that trail into a firestorm. The room was dark except for the cold glow of a laptop screen. No studio lights, no handlers, no countdown music. Just Jasmine Crockett and Yara Shahidi, seated shoulder to shoulder in a hotel suite somewhere in D.C., their silhouettes lit only by truth and fire. Behind them, the city slept. But on the other side of the screen, the country was about to wake up. At exactly 8 p.m., Yara leaned forward and clicked the Go Live button. The screen flickered. Then, silence followed by Jasmine's voice. We're not here tonight to make a statement, she said. We're here to break a silence. No title card, no press team. Just two women sitting with nothing to lose, and a story too dangerous for the evening news. Jasmine didn't start with accusations. She started with facts. She recounted the summit, the invitation, the polite smiles, the moment her microphone was cut mid-sentence, the moment she spoke about systemic injustice. Her tone was calm, precise. That was no technical error, she said. It was a political decision. Yara followed, her voice lower, but no less deadly. Within 2 hours, my interview was canceled. My face disappeared from their promos. I was told it was a coincidence. Then I got the email. If you defend her, you'll fall with her. She looked directly into the lens. I'm still standing. They took turns, building their case like seasoned prosecutors. The audience wasn't treated like an audience. It was treated like a jury. Yara held up her phone and flipped through time-stamped photos, internal documents with redlining that read like blueprints for censorship. Jasmine showed pages from the binder, clearly labeled internal only, with directives like, cut mic upon mention of state violence or racial bias in law enforcement. Divert attention using moderator interjection if structural racism is referenced. Jasmine's voice dropped. You don't invite someone to speak if you've already written their silence in advance. Then came the moment that split the screen like lightning. She leaned forward. If the law can't protect our truth, then we'll become the law. The chat detonated. TikTokers clipped it in real time. Twitter ran red with hashtags. Within minutes, the phrase was plastered over protest posters, iPhone wallpapers, and digital billboards hacked by activists. Her voice, quiet, steady, had just rewritten the room they never wanted her to enter. And Yara followed, calm as a guillotine. We are not your entertainment, she said. We are your echo. We don't exist to soften the blow. We exist to return it. No applause, no dramatic music. Just the truth, delivered like a scalpel in the dark. They didn't thank viewers. They didn't ask for donations. They didn't give a call to action. They closed the laptop. Just silence. in 2 seconds of black screen that felt louder than any speech. The impact, immediate. 2.3 million people watched it live. Within 6 hours, 9.7 million. Within 2 days, 22 million. The White House press secretary was asked about it during a briefing and offered a stiff, "We're reviewing the situation." That afternoon, 4 members of Congress called for an ethics investigation into the Civic Horizon Foundation. The summit moderators deleted their social accounts. Sponsors fled like rats from a sinking stage. But this wasn't about vengeance. It was about revelation. College classrooms replayed the live stream on loop. Professors rewrote lecture plans around it. Teenagers quoted it on subway walls in chalk and permanent marker. If the law can't protect our truth, then we'll become the law became more than a line. It became a generation's answer to silence. Reporters who once ignored Jasmine now begged for comment. Networks that dropped Yara requested exclusives. But they didn't rush back to microphones. They had learned, the microphone is not neutral, and neither is silence. When CNN asked for an interview, Jasmine responded with a single question. Will I be allowed to finish a sentence this time? They didn't just take control of the narrative. They shattered the myth that anyone else ever held it. By week's end, the echo was louder than the original event. Youth organizations adopted their language. Protesters projected their lines onto courthouse walls. Even skeptical politicians began echoing parts of their message, afraid to look outdated or worse, exposed. But the 2 women who lit the match didn't ask for followers. They weren't building a brand, they were building a firewall against silence, against erasure, against the lie that truth must come pre-approved to be heard. They didn't go viral. They went visible, fully, fiercely, irrevocably. And somewhere in that same hotel room, long after the cameras went dark, Jasmine looked at Yara and said, not with triumph, but with steel in her voice, "They thought they could write us out of history, but they forgot. We write too." The live stream was over, but its aftershocks didn't fade. They detonated across institutions, cracked through policy, and forced the country to choose. Keep the silence or finally hear what had always been spoken in whispers. By the end of the week, the Civic Horizon Foundation was no longer just a name at the bottom of a press kit. It was the center of a political earthquake. The Senate Judiciary Subcommittee launched a formal inquiry into the foundation's funding practices and internal censorship protocols. Anonymous whistleblowers surfaced one by one, leaking emails, memos, and audio recordings that confirmed what Jasmine and Yara had shown the world. That silencing was not accidental. It was institutional, strategic, pre-approved. By Monday, major corporate sponsors withdrew their financial support. A 6-figure partnership with a national bank vanished overnight. 2 media groups canceled future summits. Board members resigned. Their mission statement was scrubbed from the website. Silence, once weaponized against 2 women, was now collapsing on the very system that created it. Across the country, state lawmakers could no longer pretend this was just a media flashpoint. In California, Illinois, and Georgia, 3 separate legislative proposals were introduced within days, all designed to protect the right to speak freely at publicly funded forums and academic events. The bills aim to outlaw covert editorial control over guest speakers, prevent audio censorship in live events, and mandate transparency from organizations hosting open dialogue. For the first time in years, bipartisan support was visible, not out of moral clarity, but political survival. No one wanted to be caught on the wrong side of a movement with 22 million eyes watching. While institutions scrambled to respond, academia responded with something different: reverence. Jasmine Crockett received formal honors from 5 major law schools within 2 weeks. Howard University hosted an emergency forum titled Voice, Law, and Power. The Crockett Doctrine, live-streamed to over 200,000 viewers. Harvard Law invited her to deliver the spring commencement address, an invitation extended only twice in the last 20 years to someone outside the judiciary. Students quoted her in final exams. Professors rewrote syllabi overnight. Her words had become precedent before the courts ever could. But amid the rising tide of invitations, think tank proposals, and even exploratory political offers, Yara remained still. When asked on air if she would consider running for office, her answer was quiet, clear, and devastating. Not yet, she said, because I don't want the next generation to run for microphones. I want to hand them one. I want to make sure they don't grow up asking permission to speak. That line became its own ripple, spreading through campuses and community centers like a gospel for the unheard. They had both been offered platforms before, but now they were the platform, and they didn't use it to rise. They used it to elevate others. Meanwhile, students across the country began organizing #Echo chapters, decentralized forums in schools and colleges where young people could speak freely without fear of being edited, cut, or sanitized. Some were raw, some were chaotic, all were real. A high school in Michigan named their auditorium after Jasmine Crockett. A community center in Atlanta built a youth-led panel on civic activism and called it the Yara table. Every echo had a name now, and every name carried weight. The press tried to keep up, but the movement no longer belonged to press cycles. It belonged to memory, and memory had grown teeth. Back in D.C., as the Capitol debated whether to formally investigate broader media suppression trends, one senator stood and read Jasmine's livestream quote into the congressional record: "If the law can't protect our truth, then we'll become the law." It was the first time in decades that words spoken outside the Capitol carried more moral authority than anything spoken inside it. In private, Jasmine refused to celebrate. She knew what the system did to those it couldn't control. "This isn't justice," she told Yara during a quiet walk through Judiciary Square. "This is a crack, a fracture in the wall. Now we find out whether anyone is brave enough to step through it." And Yara, as always, answered not with hope, but with clarity. "If they don't, we will." The live stream had ended, but its pulse didn't. It traveled, not through scheduled news cycles or official press releases, but through shaky screen recordings, stitched Instagram reels, and TikToks subtitled in languages Jasmine had never spoken. Within hours, her voice was flying across borders faster than any government could contain. The truth had slipped through the cracks, and now it was leaking everywhere. In Paris, a group of student activists projected Jasmine's final words in blazing white letters across the Palais de Justice. "If the law can't protect our truth, then we'll become the law." The police ordered them down. They refused. By morning, "Chir devenait la loi" trended in France. Protesters stood in front of embassies, holding hand-drawn signs. "Let her speak." A member of the French National Assembly quoted Yara's line during a hearing on police oversight. In Lagos, Nigeria, a 21-year-old woman named Ayodele streamed the video to a crowd of students under a canvas tent in a university courtyard. Many of them had never heard of Jasmine Crockett or Yara Shahidi. Most didn't know what the Civic Horizon Foundation was, but they didn't need the context. The moment they heard the mic cut off mid-sentence, the meaning landed. By the time the video ended, the crowd was chanting in sync, "We are not your entertainment, we are your echo." The clip made local news. The phrase made it onto street murals within days. In Seoul, a law student translated the entire transcript into 6 languages and posted it on a public drive titled, "For every woman who's been interrupted." In Mumbai, teens painted the quote across school walls. In Santiago, high schoolers walked out of class in silence, with the live stream transcript pinned to their uniforms. In Tunis, a radio station aired Jasmine's speech daily, calling it the most important courtroom testimony never given in court. It wasn't America's reckoning anymore. It was everyone's. Then the global institutions caught up. The United Nations Human Rights Council added the incident to its emergency review docket. 3 special rapporteurs issued a joint statement condemning digital censorship, specifically naming private entities that stifled political speech. Amnesty International dubbed Jasmine and Yara's livestream a paradigm shift in whistleblower communication. Human Rights Watch cited the case in a report on platform manipulation and algorithmic bias, but as admiration poured in, so did distortion. State-run media in Russia ran nightly segments titled "The Death of American Free Speech," featuring Jasmine's cut mic moment on repeat. Chinese broadcasters subtitled the entire stream and ran it in prime time, framing it as proof that Western democracy had collapsed under its own hypocrisy. While the world embraced their words, regimes twisted them. Their truth had traveled so far, it now had to survive outside their control. Jasmine knew the weight of it when she woke up to her voice dubbed in Mandarin over a state news anchor. "This isn't what I meant," she whispered. But it was too late. She and Yara weren't just women anymore. They were symbols, tools, threats, weapons, depending on who held the remote. So they did what they always did, reclaim the mic. Jasmine released a quiet video, no press, no graphics, just her in a hoodie, speaking directly to the camera. "This isn't a war between nations," she said. "It's a fight between those who hoard power and those forced to whisper the truth. If you've ever been told to wait, to shrink, to soften, this moment is yours too." The video was subtitled into 32 languages within a week. Meanwhile, Yara received an invitation to speak at the Global Summit on Press Freedom in The Hague. She declined. Instead, she sent a proposal: fund 50 youth-run media hubs around the world. "Don't fly me in to speak," she wrote. "Use that ticket to buy someone else a microphone." The summit board approved it unanimously. They had never intended to become global leaders. But what they became was more dangerous. Global permission. Not permission to rebel, permission to speak. And that permission ignited movement. In Brazil, a feminist collective launched a pirate radio station called Voz delas, their voice, broadcasting political poetry, protest speeches, and survivor testimonies. In Tunisia, female journalists formed a network named Echo Circle, designed to amplify silenced voices and protect reporters at risk. In Sydney, 2 teenage girls built a peer-led media app, aggregating raw news footage from over 20 countries. They called it Resonance. They didn't ask to go viral. They asked to be heard. And when the world listened, it didn't applaud, it responded. Within 2 weeks, 3,100 independent subtitled versions of the live stream existed online. Over 150 million combined views across platforms. A data analytics firm reported more global interactions with Jasmine and Yara's speech than with the last U.S. presidential address. Google Trends lit up with one question: who is Jasmine Crockett? But the most powerful moment came quietly. A teacher in South Africa filmed her 5th-grade students reciting Jasmine's quote in unison. In Kenya, a girl too shy to speak in class wrote a poem based entirely on Yara's line, "We are your echo." In a Syrian refugee camp, a smuggled phone played the stream on loop. No one translated it, but everyone watching understood. Because some things don't need subtitles, they just need a signal. And now that signal had crossed oceans. The silence didn't last long. It never does when power feels cornered. By the time Jasmine and Yara's stream passed 50 million views globally, the machinery that had failed to contain them began to reassemble. This time not with cords and mics, but with weapons honed behind closed doors. The media storm they had set off wasn't just burning down systems. It was threatening careers, donors, institutions that depended on silence packaged as neutrality. And those who'd been exposed weren't just embarrassed. They were angry. The first blow came quiet and anonymous, just like the threats that arrived before the live stream. A new video began circulating, heavily edited, clipped together with ominous music and subtle distortion. It showed Jasmine at a past rally, her voice raised in anger, layered with protest footage, fires, and the sound of glass shattering, none of which had anything to do with her. The voiceover whispered, "Is this who we let speak for us?" The source, unknown. The platform, everywhere. Next came the headlines. From hero to hysterical, Yara's echo or Jasmine's agenda. The weaponization of wokeness. How 2 women hijacked the national stage. A right-wing network ran a 48-hour loop dissecting Jasmine's quote out of context, stripping it down to 5 words. "Will become the law." They labeled it a threat. They called it insurrection. They ran side-by-side comparisons of her and footage from January 6. On social media, bot networks amplified the smear. Fake accounts posed as concerned parents, disillusioned students, even former supporters claiming they felt tricked. A conservative columnist published an article alleging Jasmine had ties to radical international groups based on a mistranslated activist post from Brazil. It was all smoke, but the fire it fueled was real. Then came the data breach. Yara's private messages were leaked. Years of texts, emails, voice memos. Most were harmless. Some were personal. One showed her venting frustration about the Democratic Party's silence. It was enough. The news cycle pounced. Suddenly, she was no longer a symbol of hope. She was a divisive figure. One anchor even referred to her as unstable, citing her emotional tone during interviews. No one mentioned she'd been 22 when it all began. Sponsors pulled back. Schools that had invited Jasmine now asked her to postpone. Major platforms flagged their content for fact-checking, even when it was their own footage. Someone filed a FOIA request for Jasmine's congressional records, an intimidation tactic wrapped in paperwork. And still, the women stood. But this time, they didn't just speak. They struck back. At 7 p.m. on a Wednesday night, Jasmine released a 10-minute video titled, Receipts. No music, no drama. Just her sitting at a desk, scrolling through every false headline with timestamps, source credits, and direct contradictions from the outlets themselves. She didn't raise her voice once. Her fury came in the form of clarity so sharp it cut cleaner than Outrage ever could. Yara followed with a live stream titled, Here's What They Didn't Show You. She played the full, unedited version of the deepfake video, the one that had twisted Jasmine's rally speech. Then she brought on the journalist who had originally filmed it, who confirmed live that the recent version was manipulated. The comments section exploded. Viewers started sharing side-by-side comparisons, tearing down the smear campaign faster than it could regenerate. Then Jasmine and Yara did the one thing no one expected. They turned their fire outward, not just at the institutions that tried to silence them, but at the playbook of silence itself. Jasmine spoke directly to young activists. This is the cost. They'll gaslight your footage. They'll edit your emotion. They'll weaponize your hope. But you keep going, because the minute they try to erase you, you know you're onto something they fear. Yara created a digital archive called Refused Edits, a crowdsourced database of politically censored speeches, student protests suppressed by schools, whistleblower clips taken down for violating terms. Thousands uploaded within days. TikTokers stitched their own versions. Journalists began referencing the archive in exposés about algorithmic suppression. The media couldn't contain it anymore. They tried interviews, damage control, new headlines. But Jasmine and Yara weren't giving them sound bites. They were giving them back their silence and letting it speak for itself. And then came the moment that flipped the narrative on its head. A leaked memo surfaced from a lobbying firm tied to Civic Horizon, revealing a months-long strategy to neutralize political disruptors through narrative inversion and emotional discreditation. Attached were profiles of both Jasmine and Yara, complete with media weak points, preferred framing suggestions, and lists of advisable surrogate voices, influencers, anchors, academics, paid to question their credibility. It wasn't a theory, it was proof. The document went viral. Overnight, the smear became the scandal. News outlets that had aired the edited clips issued statements, not apologies, but clarifications. Public figures who had criticized the women quietly deleted their tweets. A major podcast host read the entire memo aloud on air and ended the episode by saying, "I've been played. We all have." The narrative had turned, but for Jasmine and Yara, the damage wasn't undone. It never is. The calls from schools didn't return. The sponsors didn't reappear. But something better emerged. Credibility. Unshakable. Unbought. A deeper loyalty from the people who watched them weather not just censorship, but retaliation, and still speak. When asked in a town hall what she would say to young women afraid of the same backlash, Jasmine didn't hesitate. "They're going to come for you either way," she said, "so make sure you give them something they can't forget." And Yara, when asked what gave her strength to endure it, simply said, "Because someone else has to speak after me, and I refuse to let them inherit silence." They didn't ask for war, but when it came, they answered. Not with rage, but with record. Not with vengeance, but with vision. Not with flame, but with truth. And the kind of echo that even power can't drown. It didn't end with a press conference. There were no fireworks, no headlines declaring victory, no banner reading, "We won." In fact, there was no single moment where the system collapsed or changed overnight. What Jasmine Crockett and Yara Shahidi had done was something far less glamorous and far more dangerous. They endured, and in that endurance, they rewrote what power could never touch. Months after the storm, Jasmine stood beneath a canopy of oak trees at an old university in South Carolina. The air smelled of wet stone and chalk dust. Students buzzed around her, some whispering, some bold enough to walk up and say thank you. But Jasmine's eyes were on the small bronze plaque just unveiled beside a lecture hall. Crockett Hall, not named by donors, not approved by trustees, voted in by students, carved by their voices. As cameras flashed and officials clapped, Jasmine didn't smile, not out of pride, but wait. She knew what that name cost. Every letter etched into the metal came from sleepless nights, burned bridges, and the kind of silence that doesn't echo. It chokes. And now it stood not as an award, but a warning. A reminder that truth doesn't always survive because it's protected. Sometimes it survives because someone refused to let it die. Across the country, Yara was in a different kind of room. A small, windowless space at a community center in Oakland. No cameras, no speeches. Just 13 teenage girls sitting in a circle with mics on borrowed tripods and clipboards filled with interview notes. They were building a podcast network, one Yara had helped fund but refused to take credit for. She sat on the floor with them, cross-legged, listening more than speaking. One of the girls asked, "Why didn't you run for Congress? You could win." Yara paused, looked around, and then said, "Because I don't want to be the one holding the mic." She pointed to the girl. "I want to be the one handing it to you." The room went silent. Then one by one they nodded. In the months since the live stream, a quiet revolution had begun, not in voting booths or courtrooms, but in whispered decisions and private defiance. Teachers who once skipped the topic now played the video in class. Students stopped asking for permission before organizing forums. Activists launched local echo pods, open mic spaces in libraries, gyms, parks, anywhere voices could breathe. Not everything changed. Not yet. Major networks still hesitated to feature Jasmine. Yara remained locked out of the corporate circles that once sought her as a brand, not a voice. But they no longer needed those gates. They had cracked the culture behind them, and cracks, as they knew, were how light gets in. In a quiet suburb of Atlanta, a mother named Denise stood outside a school board, meeting with a sign. "I'm not here because I want to be loud. I'm here because someone taught me I don't have to be silent." In a village in the Philippines, a teenage journalist started a newsletter using only WhatsApp, entitled it Mic Drop. The first edition quoted Jasmine's line. In Germany, a university offered a new course, Silent Speech, from Cicero to Crockett. Jasmine and Yara watched all of it unfold, not as leaders, but as witnesses. They had become more than names. They had become methods. One night, Jasmine returned to the hotel where they had streamed the original broadcast. She asked for the same suite. It hadn't changed. Same curtains, same desk, same spot where they had closed the laptop and changed the conversation. She sat in the chair, alone now, and whispered, "They'll try again." But the difference now was this. There would be thousands ready, not to follow, but to stand, not to repeat, but to respond. Weeks later, she received a letter, handwritten, folded into a school report from a 10-year-old girl in Kentucky. It said, "They cut your mic, but I heard you anyway. I think maybe I want to be a lawyer now, or maybe a poet, or both." Jasmine kept it folded in her wallet, not as sentiment, but as strategy, because every girl like that was one fewer whisper lost. At a small conference with no live stream, no headline coverage, and no red carpet, Yara spoke just once to a crowd of educators. No theatrics. Just this. You don't need to become loud to be heard. You need to become undeniable. That was what power couldn't kill. Not volume, not visibility, but undeniability. The kind that survives microphones being cut. The kind that lives on in chalk on pavement. The kind that echoes not in rooms built for power, but in those that steal it back. The movement never had a name. It didn't need one, because the people who carried it didn't shout its title. They lived its message. And in every quiet act of resistance, In every whispered, "I heard her too." In every chalk sidewalk and secondhand podcast, in every voice that dared not to ask for the mic, but to take it, they proved one thing. What power tries to kill? Truth, echo, memory, fire, never dies. It multiplies. And when the last camera shut off, when the world caught its breath, one question still remained. One louder than applause, stronger than backlash, and more urgent than ever. What did this really mean? It meant that justice isn't always delivered in marble rooms or written in legal ink. It's often carved in whispers, in broken sentences, in the spaces where truth is told and then punished for its volume. Jasmine Crockett and Yara Shahidi did not step onto a battlefield with armor or banners. They walked into a room built to absorb their light and dared to turn up the brightness. They weren't fighting to be heard. They were fighting for the right to finish a sentence without interruption, to speak of injustice without fear of being edited, and to stand in the open without being reduced to a soundbite. The microphones weren't just tools. They were gatekeepers. And when the gate slammed shut, they didn't knock. They broke it. With their words, with their presence, with the undeniable weight of being women who refused to shrink. The story isn't about two people who went viral. It's about two people who survived being silenced and then weaponized the silence. They turned censorship into a stage, threats into fuel, and fear into direction. The systems that tried to erase them had done it before, quietly, efficiently, and often without resistance. But this time, the system met women who didn't just resist. They remembered. They documented. They responded in real time, with receipts, with truth, and with a courage that didn't blink even when the world turned its back. And that's the lesson. The difference between collapse and change is often one person refusing to shut up. What Jasmine and Yara proved is that injustice doesn't always wear a uniform or bang a gavel. Sometimes it smiles from behind a press badge. Sometimes it cuts your mic while calling you valued. Sometimes it hides in a panel agenda or in the soft-spoken moderator who steers your story off course. But the most dangerous kind of injustice, it's the kind that cloaks itself in professionalism. Polite, 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 until you realize you were erased without anyone ever raising their voice. Jasmine saw it, Yara felt it, and they didn't just survive it. They pulled the curtain off so everyone else could see too. This isn't just a story about race or gender or power. It's about erasure, about how society polices voices not with force, but with silence. And the deeper truth is this: people aren't silenced when they scream. They're silenced when no one listens after. What Jasmine and Yara built wasn't a moment, it was a mirror, held up to the institutions that still choose comfort over correction, held up to audiences that cheer for bravery, but turn the volume down when the truth starts to sting. Held up to us. The human message underneath all the fire is this: your voice is not optional. It is not decoration. It is not a privilege handed to you by media contracts or speaking invites. It is your first weapon, your final defense, your birthright. And when it's threatened, when it's challenged by power that thinks it owns the narrative, your job isn't just to hold on to it. Your job is to hand it to the person behind you, and then the person behind them, until the echo becomes so loud no system built on silence can hold. Jasmine didn't break the law. She broke the illusion that law alone was enough. Yara didn't hijack a moment. She took back the space that was stolen. Together they proved that resistance isn't always loud. It's persistent. And sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is not shut up, to say no when everything around her says not now, to document the injustice before it's buried, and to choose visibility even when it becomes a target painted on her back. In the end, this story leaves us with more than hashtags. It leaves us with a challenge. What will you do when they cut your mic? What will you say when you realize the room wasn't built for your voice? Will you whisper? Or will you build your own room, your own signal, your own law? Because when power meets truth, it always flinches. And when truth speaks back, it never dies, it multiplies. So now that you've heard their story, not just the words, but the fight beneath them, there's only one thing left to ask. What will you do with it? Don't just share the video. Don't just quote the line. Don't just nod and whisper powerful. Because the truth Jasmine and Yara carried didn't survive so we could admire it. It survived so we could use it. You've seen what happens when silence is exposed, when the mic cuts, when the platform folds, when power tries to turn women into props and resistance into spectacle. You've seen them bleed for every sentence they got to finish. Now it's your turn. Speak when it's uncomfortable. Document what they want hidden. Ask the hard questions when they hand you the soft script. Show up in rooms you were never meant to enter, and speak like you were never planning to leave. Because the system doesn't fear noise. It fears memory. It fears people who remember the lies and refuse to repeat them. Start a forum in your school. Create your own live stream. Amplify the voice that was cut off mid-sentence. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for a title. Don't wait for safety. Because power never hands you a mic. It hands you silence and dares you to fight for sound. Fight, not with fists, but with footage. Not with rage, but with record. Tell your story before someone else edits it to fit theirs. And if they call you too loud, too sharp, too much, remember Jasmine. Remember Yara. Remember what happened when they didn't flinch. Then look them in the eye and say, I am not here to be quiet. I am here to finish the sentence. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.